Hello and welcome to this episode of Battling with Business with me, Gareth Tennant.
And me, Chris Kitchener.
As you know, I'm a former Royal Marines officer and Chris is a product manager from the world of business, and we explore ideas and concepts around teams and teamwork, leaders and leadership, and all things in between, comparing and contrasting our experiences as we attempt to work out what makes teams, leaders, and businesses tick. And this week, we're doing another of our influencers episodes, and it's one that I'm really excited about because I think this is perhaps the most unusual given the genre of sort of people that we look at in the influencer episodes. It's one of the most unusual ones that we've covered.
Oh, don't you're gonna spoil the narrative surprise.
It's somebody I know absolutely nothing about. And I'm handed over to Chris because you've done all the research.
First of all, I love the way we do this every time where we imply that people don't know who this is about. I'm hoping there are some people who just download our episode, don't look at the title and hit play, in which case this is far more entertaining, but everyone else otherwise knows. But to go back and to regain our sense of narrative tension, Gareth, today, I'm going to start in an unusual way. I want to read you some poetry. I stay out too late. Got nothing in my brain. That's when people say, That's when people say, I go on too many dates, but I can't make them stay. At least that's what people say. That's what people say. But I keep cruising, can't stop, won't stop moving. It's like I've got this music in my mind saying it's going to be all right because the player's going to play. And the hater's going to hate. Baby, I'm just going to shake. I shake it off. Who. And for those of you who are wondering which great author wrote those words,
I'm going to, is that Shelley, Keats or Byron? I'm
very, very close. Taylor Swift. But that's Shake It Off. And we are talking about Taylor Swift today, and the reason why I quite like that is because I, like you, didn't and don't know a lot about the music of Taylor Swift, but what I remember was there was a thing where people kept re-recording the video for Shake It Off, and the one I remember were multiple members of the both British and US military in Afghanistan and Iraq recording these in obscure places, as well as firefighters, as well as school teachers. But that was an interesting viral moment. And at the time I didn't realize, but started telling me a lot about Taylor Swift. So before, as you've implied, you don't know much about Taylor Swift. And in fact, I'll tell you what I knew before, because before we came on, we shared what we knew, and I think it's very similar.
Before you do, is it worth just saying why we decided to do Taylor Swift as an influencer? Because if we're both saying we didn't know anything about her, it kind of is illogical to then jump in. So I think over the last few weeks, there's been the whole Super Bowl controversy. And Taylor Swift is, as you say, a pop star that we're just not the right demographic, middle-aged men.
Speak for yourself.
My daughters aren't quite old enough. My daughters are 5 and 8, so not quite getting into popular culture just yet. And so I know of Taylor Swift, you know of Taylor Swift as just a pop star, a very successful pop star. But over the last few weeks, the controversy in her involvement with the US Super Bowl and how that has polarized her as a political figure in the current ongoing Trump-Biden presidential race just indicated quite how influential key individuals from the world of celebrity can be. And we've made a real effort to make sure that our influencer episodes aren't all historical military men. And we're constantly looking for interesting use cases, interesting people that from a completely different background have lessons that we can learn about influence. And so I think we were both sort of spitballing ideas and quite excited about the fact that this is somebody that is completely, a bit like the Dolly Parton episode that we did, completely out of our normal sort of working, we just don't come into contact with the likes of Taylor Swift.
And importantly, if people are listening and think they're going to spend an hour or however long it is saying famous person with lots of followers says a thing and influences people, actually, that's what surprised me as I dug into this. There's an element of that, but that's not the story. There's actually a huge amount more here. And there's two things before I sort of get on with the who is she and telling that story, which is the first thing, which I think is very unusual, is unlike almost all of our influencers, possibly with one exception, it is not clear yet what the story is going to be. Taylor Swift is 33. She has not yet finished that story of her influence. And so that's really weird for us. We're watching a thing happening as it happens, which means it's much more difficult to sort of take that step back and examine it. So that's interesting.
That is, I haven't even considered that. But yeah, of course, she's hopefully not even halfway through her influencer journey.
The second thing that's interesting is, and I found this throughout, to be fair, I'm sure there are people who might be listening who are Swifties, who are the Taylor Swift fans, who will say this is nonsense. But obviously, we do some research, we look around, we, see if we can see stuff that she said or done and things that other people have said. I have this unerring sense that I don't know who Taylor Swift really is. Now, people will say to me, well, you should go watch her documentary and then you'll learn about her. And I would say it could be a fantastic marketing package that we see, or it could be that we see literally Taylor Swift as she is. But rather than get hung up on whether we understand who Taylor Swift really is, the bit that's more interesting to me almost is the effect she has on other people. So I think this is as much a podcast about, for want of a better word, followership, as it is around how Taylor Swift does things. So we'll
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's I can't tell you. With Elon Musk, we could go, these are things he does and the way he does them that are good, and these are things he does and the way he does them that are bad. There isn't as much of that here. Anyway, let's crack on with the story of Taylor Swift, because the beginning of the story is almost a summary of the bigger story. Small town American girl makes good. So she was born in 1989. As I said, she's only 33, on a Christmas tree farm in Pennsylvania. And she was always musical and loved music, and the stories about her learning guitar and things like that. And as time went on, she decided, and I'm using she in inverted commas, that actually, because of her love of music, she needed to move somewhere more musical. And so the family moved to Nashville. Huge thing. Family says, we're going to make Taylor a success. We're going to move to Nashville. And so today, if you think of her, she's early music was very country and Western. Lots of people, if you ask where she's from, they'll say she's from Nashville. She's not from Nashville. She's from Pennsylvania. And so there's the sort of the track of the story, which is small town American girl, likes wearing cardigans, loves cats. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, on multiple occasions. The family gave up everything they had, took her. She was discovered. She is the daughter of Scott Swift, who was a Merrill Lynch wealth manager, and is the daughter of Andrea Swift, a marketing manager and entrepreneur. So there's a really interesting thing there, which is, was it Small Girl Made Good, or was it, as Inc. magazine has implied, and I quote, their daughter was groomed, empowered, mentored to be the CEO of her global family business?
Oh, yeah. So that is very different. Whether it was a designer pop star kind of story, or I don't know, and we can perhaps discuss that. But straight away, a very different start to Dolly Parton. And I think I'm probably gonna do a lot of referring back, because this feels at the moment like the closest episode to Taylor Swift is the Dolly Parton one. And that story was absolutely, poverty, rags to riches, kind of the talent is what shone through, rather than having those starters in life that gave her an advantage from the beginning.
We joked about this before we came on. because the episode will have the word Taylor Swift and the algorithms will go nuts on it when we release this, there's a fair chance there'll be some fans who will see this and say, we want to learn everything we can about her. And by the way, they'll be very disappointed because this is recycling mostly what other people have said about her. But one thing I want to say from the very beginning, and again, I sort of said about the whether or not Taylor Swift is good or not good, bad or not bad. She is an astoundingly talented artist. So that I don't think is in question. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on. Her musical abilities, whether you like a music or don't like them, she is a talent. So what I don't think is that this is a, there are bands that are created on purpose who aren't really that musical. No, this is opposite. I think if she was boosted, it was to boost her natural skills. So she is an extraordinarily talented and clever woman. And as I say, I think it's less about declaring whether that's true or not true. It's more the sort of the knock-on effect. But anyway, at 11, she tried, I would imagine part of the family tried and failed to get her signed on a record label. She was rejected by a number of labels. And so she rather than singing, she focused on songwriting. Interestingly, and this isn't talked about very much, I only found this in sort of a small place, she then went on and did a bit of modeling. So she modeled for Abercrombie and Fitch, which is a big brand in the US. But then in 2005, at the age of 14, she was signed to a record label called Big Machine. And this is where the Taylor Swift story explodes. Her debut album was released at 16, and her album gave her a first top 40 hit called Tim McGraw, which is the name of a famous country and Western musician. And it's a song about the relationship with a boy and how she hopes that he thinks of her whenever he hears the music of Tim McGraw. So this is the first sort of sign you're starting to get. And we'll talk about her sort of image, which is relatable, girl next door, the girl like you that suffers the same problems, losses, wanting to find love as anyone else. So this was back in 2005. By 2008, she's got her first #1 album called Fearless. She continues to explode, and I'm not going to read through her discography, but it is significant and grows. And she moved from being more country to pop to a bit of rock. Now she's one of these sort of, she makes her own genres as we goes. Let's just touch a little bit on what success means for her, because you sort of said one of the most successful. When we talked about Elon Musk, I remember we talked about the money he'd earned and the things he'd done. This is as impressive, and in some ways, if not more impressive. She has received 11 Grammys, which is for those who don't know, is the sort of the Oscars of the music world, 42 nominations, and she has received the Grammy for Best Album 3 times. She starred in her own documentary, available on Netflix today. We're not sponsored by Netflix, called Miss Americana. I have to go back and watch that after I've done my research to see whether it gels. I just didn't get a chance.
So is that's a documentary about her and about her life?
About her, made by her, or controlled by her. And in it, I believe, was the famous statement about whether or not she could support Donald Trump.
Right. Because it's interesting, and we'll see what else she's doing in terms of using her power and influence. But a lot of people, especially young women that are incredibly successful, often use their power and influence to try and create a change in the world, to make the journeys of following on young women easier and better. In fact, I think powerful people generally have things that they want to change in the world. Is Taylor Swift's documentary, clearly it's about her, so it's also part of controlling her narrative, and I haven't seen it, so it's difficult to comment, but is this about her using her journey to change the world and make things easier for other people, or is this just
I don't
about
think so. So to be clear, I have not seen the hour-and-a-half Netflix documentary, but my assumption based on what I've heard and what I've read is that it is more about who she is and her story, rather than I'm going to spend an hour and a half saying we should do more good in the world. It is a documentary interspersed with her music. But going back to your point, she absolutely does have a stance on charity. There's lots of charities. She donates a lot of money. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later.
Okay.
She has cautiously talked about her political views.
Yeah.
She's an activist of various kinds, but it's not clear that's her primary mode. It is.
Okay.
The implication is these are the things that I personally believe, and so these are how I personally support them, rather than I'm going to stand up in my music and say, everyone, you have to do this because this is what I believe in. And well, there's a blurred line there, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah,
So
and I just before we do, I just want to make the point that I don't think if you are powerful and successful, that automatically means that you should be using that power and influence to drive, other causes. I think you can be successful, just in your own right because you're talented in your field, and that's perfectly fine. So it's not a judgment that I'm sort of saying what she's squandering her,
no, not at all.
potential or power. But I do think we as society quite often do that, and we look at people who are successful and say, well, they should be doing more for these causes, and we politicize with a small p the success of other people rather than just recognizing the success in their own right for being talented in their field.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And she there was an example where she talks about the Donald Trump thing, and I think the phrase was, I can't just sit by and not say anything, which implies to me, probably it was exactly what you said, which is my purpose is not political activism. My purpose is making great music and enjoying myself and all those kind of things. And the political stuff comes from there. But going forward, so she has also appeared on TV quite a lot, actually. So she appeared on CSI Crime Scene Investigation. That's a very popular American TV show. She was on SNL, Saturday Night Live, and I enjoyed this. She was also in the film Cats, which I suspect no one wants to talk about because no one wants to talk about the film Cats, but she was in there as well. Now we get back to, so just the reason why I listed those things was demonstrably from a cultural perspective that you're ticking all the success things that you go and do these things. Now we get to sort of the more interesting Taylor Swift stuff. So if you remember, she signed with this record label called Big Machine, and she had a dispute with them. And I believe another singer tweeted, well, why don't you just re-record the albums and put a different cover on them? And so she did exactly that. So there are 2 versions of 4 albums, and 4 of them are subtitled Taylor's version. And damn it, those are the ones that are selling because all her fans buy the Taylor's version and not the Big Machine version. And I thought that is maybe dipping into the what an influencer does. This is a person who took control. I have been wronged in whatever way it was by this record company. I'm going to do something that no one else would necessarily think of, which is I'm just going to record the albums again and make them mine again. And she did that. I thought that was really, really interesting. And I think there's a little bit of Taylor Swift in there going, this is how I roll. This is what I'm going to go do. And to some degree, supporting the idea that it's not clear this is a group of people who are marketing her. There's an element of it feels like there's a lot of her in this as well, one way or another.
And I suppose that reinforces the talent is in the artist, not the supporting organization around her. If she can say, do you know what, I can recreate this stuff, I'm confident enough that I can go and do this in any recording studio. It's not about the editing. I think that's really cool.
The fact that you said that's really cool. Oh, look, you're starting to become a follower. And you
Am I becoming a Swiftie?
Well, but you can imagine. Yes, actually, I think that's exactly true.
Awesome.
And I'm gonna tell you the reason why you do not want your daughters to love Taylor Swift a little bit later on, for not for bad reasons, for good reasons. But this goes back to the influencer thing. So I was talking to my son in the car and said, "What do you think about Taylor Swift?" And he said lots of 16-year-old boy derogatory things about her. And I said, "Oh, we're gonna do an influence episode." And he said, "She is not a leader." And I said, "All right, Will, we've talked about this. What's the definition of a leader?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Okay, someone who people follow." And he went, "Oh." okay, she's a really great leader then. And so this idea that she does this is a strong female. Of course, people are going to follow her. That's what your hero does. Says, "Sod you, I'm going to record it again." Most recently, she has been on a tour called the Eras Tour. She did that last year and first half of this year. I think it might even still be going. And it has become the highest grossing tour and concert film of all time. Could you guess how much revenue that tour has generated? 100 million?
It's going to be a big number.
It is $1 billion. That is unbelievable. $1 billion worth of revenue. Now, she didn't get all of that, but $1 billion. Interestingly as well, they talked about this in V Magazine, talked about this, the fact that she doesn't really dance in her shows. So you think about this, for a show that is the single most successful show, most other of these kinds of shows, the lead singer, the star, goes into these massive dance things. We've all seen Beyonce and others do it.
Yeah.
Yes, she did do that. Greg Krelenstein, apologies, Greg, when I get your name wrong, from V Magazine, said, quote, "She possesses a rare gift of turning a stadium spectacle into an intimate setting, irrespective of whether she's plucking a guitar or leading an army of dancers." I think there's a little thing there as well, which is another thing about an influencer, a leader, is the ability to control an audience is the wrong word, to captivate an audience. And so the reason why I read that one was turns the stadium spectacle into an intimate setting. The implication being, which by the way, you see time and time again, is everyone in that stadium thinks that Taylor Swift is talking to you. I know all about your problems and your life and your boyfriends and what your hopes and aspirations are. And these songs are for you. And we'll talk about that later. In terms of guiding people, her image, when you hear people describe her image, it is cardigans, hats, baking cookies, and struggling through life like everyone does. Not like terrible privations, but that guy doesn't love me, or what I hope for in the future. And so there is clearly something there. There is clearly something that we talk about at Montgomery, standing on top of a Jeep and everyone crowds around him before they go to battle. That's Taylor Swift. And clearly she can do it. And I haven't done stadium tours yet, although when we become successful, we're going to do that. But I've done lots of events where there's lots of people. And I can tell you, there is a real skill, and often it's more an innate skill, to be able to capture people like that. And what we're seeing here is someone who is very, very skilled at doing that.
So I think that's what we call persona, isn't it? It's the outward projection of your personal traits to build a connection with the people you're trying to lead. And we've talked about the mythical narratives that are created, particularly with US generals, where they like to cultivate the ideas that they read 9 books a week and run 11 miles a day, and they work off 4 hours sleep. And a lot of this is an exaggeration of the truth to make people want to respect, want to aspire to be them, want to feel that they're in the hands of somebody who is just slightly better than they are, more motivated, more determined. And then there's the physical manifestations of that in Patton's helmet, Montgomery's 2 cat badges, MacArthur's corncob pipe. These are all things that create in of themselves are just useless artifacts, but they form part of the persona that creates this sense of knowing the person, believing in the person, trusting the person. And I think that's a really important aspect of when you're leading large teams, large organizations, and you don't have a personal connection with every single member of the team. You need to have these devices that do that for you. And that's something that I've never experienced. So I've worked for people like that. I've worked for generals who are somebody that I feel very lucky if I get half an hour with. but I've never led teams myself where I don't know intimately the people that I'm leading, because the largest teams I've ever led are 40 people. And so you can still, it's difficult and you have to spend a lot of time doing it. But with 40 people, you can still know all their names. You can still know all of their partners' names, how many children they've got. It starts to become difficult to sort of remember things like when their birthdays are, or that kind of thing. But you can have a personal relationship with each one. Once you get large teams, large organizations, it becomes about this persona. And I think that's where the power of celebrity influence is so important to understand, because whilst I'm not advocating for CEOs or military leaders to be more celebrity, in fact, I'd say that's probably a bad thing to aspire to be, recognizing how you create those bonds of trust and those bonds of aspiration is really important.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And just to give you a sense of how Taylor does this. So Taylor did something when she was less successful, and I believe she still does this. I'm sure it's more controlled, is she would look on social media for people who talked about her music and liked her music. And get this, she would invite them to her house to listen to new music, and then she would bake cookies for them. So that imagine if you are a Swiftie, she loves us, she cares about us. The people who are lucky enough, she's not this sort of in an ivory tower, you can't get to her. She's accessible. She bakes cookies for people. Now, my instinct as I've sort of looked at all of this probably is Taylor Swift, by the way. This is not someone said you should do cookie parties, but how strong that is. So I think you're right. You said, I don't think we should have CEOs or leaders be more sort of create this kind of persona. I'm going to push back. I think not in a gratuitous way, but what is the CEO's equivalent of this? And I've seen lots of CEOs do sort of open hours or coffee time where they come on and talk to people. But I think there's other things to do as well. It's the dropping into the office and putting your hand on people's shoulder and saying, how's it going? But how do you take a large organization and say, I am someone that you probably want to follow and care about, even if I'm not there? I think that's strong. And
Can I just come back on that? What I wasn't saying was people in powerful positions in large organizations shouldn't be trying to cultivate a narrative or a persona. I think they absolutely should. And it's a very deliberate thing that they need to be aware of. So dismissing it as sort of facile vanity misses the point. What I am trying to say though is there are definitely the wrong lessons you can learn from the world of celebrity. So if you're doing it for popularity, you're probably doing the wrong thing. If you're doing it to build
credibility and trust,
trust, and the aspirational element of a personal relationship, you can't have a personal relationship with everybody if your organization is so large. And so I don't think trying to create the impression that you're the friend of everybody, because it becomes very, very incredible, very false, very quickly. But showing authenticity in you as a person allows people to aspirationally say, I could get to know that person. I could quite happily go for a pint with that person, or I'd really like to go to Taylor Swift's house and have cookies. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And you can have that aspirational, from the follower perspective, that aspirational view of, I wish I had the opportunity to spend time with that person. That is a really, really strong and powerful influence tool from which you can now build that trust, build that resilience, build that ability to influence in line with whatever your organizational goals are, in line with whatever you require from the team in the business or in the organization. So I think what I wasn't saying was, going after celebrity is facile and stupid. What I was saying was it is absolutely something that we need to think about, but we've got to think about it in terms of how you use it to become a better leader, not how do I become more popular. And the flip side of all of this is, whilst Taylor Swift has a really good rapport with her fans, and like you say, she's cultivated this idea that she fills a stadium with tens of thousands of people, but it feels like her message is directed at you as an individual. There's also, because it's not real, because they're not all of these personal relationships, you can lose that very, very quickly as well. And this is where you see celebrities fall from grace by doing really, a single act of stupidity, a single act of arrogance, and you can break those trust bonds very, very quickly. Whereas if you've got a small team where you've built personal relationships, you've probably got a little bit more leeway, and people will be a little bit more forgiving of your
But
errors.
that's the next thing that I want to talk about. And for me, I will give more examples of Taylor as we go through, but I almost wondered whether that relationship with the followers was the most interesting thing. So she explicitly fosters that idea of that individual relationship. And there's a really interesting statement that I've heard sort of reported from Swifties, which is, she can't protect herself, so we will protect her for her. In other words, it's this really hypersensitive, she is my friend, and because my friend is this famous pop star, there's certain things she can't do. Therefore, it is the job of myself and the other people to support her. So let's take a quick break, but I want to touch on that idea of what the flip side of, she is building a great relationship with her audience and a really strong and passionate following, but what's the knock-on effect? So let's take a quick break and let's come back with the knock-on effect. Welcome back. I think I left us hanging just before the break with, let's talk about the knock-on effect of Taylor Swift. This is difficult given I'm new to this subject, but also I think I'm overgeneralizing, but she has created an astoundingly passionate group of people who support her. They're called Swifties. You hear Swifties say, we have to protect her because she can't protect herself. The interesting thing is, as I was looking through this, and there was a really brilliant podcast I listened to, which is called Sounds Like a Cult, and it talks about Taylor Swift's supporters as if they were a cult. There's a point at which, when does a leader lose, and I'm going to use bad words, but when does a leader lose control of their followers? So, Taylor Swift, nice person. We should all be nice to one another. Yay, we should all be nice to one another. We should do these things. Yay, we should do these things. At what point does someone say, I was watching your video and you use these words, and I think that means you want me to do X? And there's a big thing about Easter eggs and people looking at her words and interpreting her words. And so here's an example. Taylor Swift is a jolly nice person, generally speaking. I found very, very few examples of not being nice. And as opposed to Elon Musk, who I think we all agree can be a proper dick at times, Taylor Swift, slightly bitchy is as far as I can go with things that I've seen her do. But there's a couple of examples where a music critic reviewed Taylor Swift's latest album and only gave it 8 out of 10. And so a subset, I am sure, of her fans doxed that person. And by doxed, I meant, we are very angry that he hasn't given this 10 out of 10. Here is his phone number. Here is his name. And here is his address. Everyone, you all know what to do. And that's not the only time they've done that. So that's really interesting, which is this idea of, and I felt almost this pseudo-religious echo, which is, there's lots of discussions about how people review Taylor Swift's lyrics, text, and interviews to derive deeper meaning. That sounds suspiciously like a religion and people looking at religious texts and deriving things like that. And by the way, just before anyone says, well, Chris, this statement that people derive an inner meaning from Taylor Swift, that's just a few foolish young supporters. Gareth, did you know 23 universities have courses on Taylor Swift?
I didn't know
23
that.
universities are studying her as a bloody topic, including history and literature through Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift and artistry and entrepreneurship. And there are some smaller universities, and there are some very well perceived universities. So,
And of course, we are doing an entire episode of our influencers. We only do 12 of these a year, in albeit a very modest and small podcast, but it's about leadership, it's about management, it's about lessons from key influencers. And we're doing Taylor Swift. So we are part of this. And
we are guilty of the same thing, where we are trying to interpret.
yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. But it's really interesting that we cover these key people, and often what we're doing is we're saying, in this particular genre, in this particular sector, this person is really successful. How much of that is down to luck? How much of that is down to circumstance? How much of that is down to their, innate traits or characteristics or lessons they've learned? What can we abstract out into the general and talk to our audience to see whether there's stuff we can learn? What's really interesting is that this feels a little bit like it's going the other way, and that actually there's a question here about, rather than lessons from Taylor Swift and her journey for the rest of the world and the rest of the world of business or military decision making, actually we're starting to see the blurring of lines of power. The fact that a whole group of what would have probably been in the 1960s a load of super fans of the Beatles or whichever group, throwing themselves emotionally into the artist's work, but as individuals, and only coming together to see this hysteria at physical group concerts and stuff. Actually, in the world of the internet, we see this being a self-enforcing and reinforcing, almost, as you said, almost cult-like thing. And so very quickly, people who are influential create influential audiences that then go on to have consequences. The fact that they're doxing a person who's given a not even a bad review, just not the 10 out of 10 review, means that will have an influence on future reviewers. That will have an influence on how the media treat Taylor Swift. And I was reading an article the other day about a very similar phenomenon happening within the K-pop movement in South Korea.
Yep.
But the opposite thing is happening, where super fans of K-pop celebrities are then starting to feel that they're being betrayed by the celebrities themselves for really simple things. Like there's a K-pop group where a female artist has announced her engagement with another relatively famous male Korean actor or celebrity of some kind. And the super fans have turned against her and said, you are not the genuine person that we thought you were. This was all a facade. And so she's created this really powerful, influential movement. And then that has turned against her and gone off as an independent movement. This is a really strange phenomenon. When it comes to influence, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to understanding the relationship of power, there's some really fundamental questions that I don't think we've had to tackle before when looking at influential people and organizations. That this is why universities are doing studies around these things. This is why you can study Taylor Swift, and with one hand you can just throw that off and say, well, this is it's facile celebrity culture and universities are just cashing in on it. But actually, I think deeper than that, this is a big part of how society works.
Well, I think it's a big part of how society has worked throughout history, just at different levels and through different mediums. But I want to go back to that really important point, because I don't know the answer to this, which is Taylor Swift. I'm just going to say now, a leader says, for whatever reason, I have a large number of people who now support and follow what I do. Good.
Yeah.
Notionally, there is this sense that I would ideally like them to behave in a certain way and think about things in a certain way, because that aligns with what my goals are. As that number of people gets wider and wider, and your ability to not invite all of them to a cookie party diminishes, how do you most effectively control that? Because I think there's a point at which, and perhaps it's just the scale we're talking Taylor Swift, where she doesn't control her audience. To some degree, her audience are beginning to control her as well. Now, this was the K-pop example you gave. So I don't know the answer to that, but which is, we all think if I can stand on the Jeep and tell my men inspirational things, they will now go on the attack and they will do good things. What if you're standing on the Jeep and they hear what you say and say, I think he said we should go and kill everyone and not take any prisoners. I didn't say that. That isn't what I said. How do you manage that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get back to that later in another episode, because the idea of getting followership is one thing. The idea of maintaining followership and ensuring that the message doesn't change is another. And you only have to look at religion. We'll offend everyone. We've offended Swifties today, and now I'm going to offend anyone religious. But the idea that you look around the world and there are appalling crimes which are made in the name of pretty much all the religions through the years, that isn't what I suspect the original people wanted. How does that happen? But anyway, let's go back to Taylor Swift. You said something really important, which is Taylor Swift is so large, she now has an effect outside of, oh, that's nice music, you're a rich person, or I'm going to go to a band. The economic impact of Taylor Swift has a name. It is called Swiftonomics. People are studying Swiftonomics. They've studied, economists and academics have studied her influence on business worldwide, and they're comparing her to the economic impact of countries. We did this with Elon Musk. I'm sure it was inaccurate, but damn it, I'm going to do it again. According to trade publication Polestar, if Swift were a country, she'd be the 199th largest economy on Earth, analogous to a small Caribbean nation.
Yeah.
There's power there. Katie Atkinson of Billboard compared Swift's 2023 earnings, which was, and well, there's lots of discussions about her earnings, but it's a lot, to the gross domestic product of East Timor. And Question Pro estimated her economy, not her earnings, but the economy around her, at $5 billion, higher than the GDP of 50 countries.
Yeah.
That, just to your point, this is not just, you know, we went on this game. We don't know much about Taylor Swift. Oh, bless. She's got some nice music and kids like her. And isn't that funny? No, this is enormous power that she and her organization and her
brand.
her brand is bringing.
Yeah.
Here's another one. So you go, well, Chris, you know, pop stars have always spent a lot of money. Taylor Swift posted a short message on Instagram encouraging her followers to register to vote. She was clear. She didn't say you should vote. I declare you should register to vote this way, although she has political views. And she pointed her listeners or her fans to a non-partisan, non-profit group called vote.org. And they recorded immediately 35,000 new registrations. And that is the most they have had since 2020, and a 23% jump over the previous year. So when Taylor Swift says you should register to vote, 35,000 people that moment went away and did it. And there is a statement, and I it's in my notes somewhere, and I'm going to miss it because I'm bouncing around. The suggestion, whether this is true or not, I don't know, is that, and this is mind-blowing, even if it's wrong by a large number, this is still mind-blowing. They believe that 18% of Americans will be influenced in the next election by who Taylor Swift says she will vote for. So this is not just this sense of, well, you know, she plays a bit of music. This is a person who generates an economy the size of East Timor. This is a person who notionally could change the outcome of presidential campaigns.
Yeah.
This is about the greatest definition of influencer you could find. And perhaps, here's an interesting statement, perhaps the most influential person we have ever covered. I mean, the ability to change outcomes of elections, generate that much income. I'm sure someone will come back and tell me why I'm wrong, but that is the definition of influence and responsibility now. When it was just a pop star saying, hey, I think we should, look after ill dogs, yeah, whatever, that's fine. Your own personal view. When a person now has the ability to influence 18% of a population,
Yeah.
now all of a sudden this is very, very serious.
But she also has a global following, and I think there's this podcast, Battling with Business, compares and contrasts military organization, decision making, teamwork, etc., with business and wider commercial and not for profit organizations. Fundamentally, we give Clausewitz, as the last influencer. Warfare is an extension of politics by other means. If you abstract out, it is simply about competitive environments, and typically warfare, state on state. It's country against country. It's about hard power, and I think it was Joseph Nye who came up with this concept of hard power and soft power. Hard power being the use of force to coerce others to do things, which is a type of leadership. Warfare is dominance through action to coerce other people to behave differently or to protect people from the coercion of somebody else. Hard power. Soft power is the influence of other people to behave differently without the need to resort to use of force. In my world, and certainly when I was in the military, we were constantly having this conversation about, does soft power, psychological effect, support hard power? Is it something that enables us to do hard power better? I.e., can you deceive the enemy with information in order to hit them harder? Could you get them to run away and therefore they're weaker when you do your assault? All of those kind of things. Or is hard power something that supports and enables soft power better? Is warfare an extension of politics, and therefore should the state, the government, the foreign policy have primacy over military command? There's a whole load of discussion in there. We're at a point where if the whole purpose of hard and soft power is changing people's behaviors through first changing their attitudes, well, Taylor Swift is no longer somebody we're giving comparison to military decision making and influence, and she is part of that process. And that I'm sure you're going to raise the fact that off the back of the Super Bowl thing, there was all these conspiracy theories about how Taylor Swift is a plant of the CIA. Well, as much as I don't believe that to be true, you can see the logical step that says if she can affect 18% of the voting population and nudge them, then that is a really powerful tool that if the state could harness it, they would try and harness it. Suddenly, an individual has power beyond a division of soldiers in a military force. An individual has power beyond a small economy, beyond a small country. And so people quite often hold up people like Bill Gates and say, Bill Gates has huge amounts of influence because he's rich. Bill Gates does have a huge amount of influence and power because he's rich. But arguably, money can only go so far. Taylor Swift has a whole economy, Taylonomics. She has the influence to change people's behaviors politically. She has the influence to change people's attitudes and probably their understanding of the world around them in a way that this takes celebrity from being a sort of vanity project. It's facile, it's about entertainment, to now this is deep at the heart of politics, it's deep at the heart of economics, and it raises some really interesting questions about where the limit of government state power lies and where key influencers who used to be valuable because if they wore the right trainers, people would buy them, can now say, this is your ability to vote is really important. It is your duty to vote. And you take it to the next step. It's voting is really important, and by God, you need to vote for this side over the other side, because this is a critical moment in human history. And
Well,
suddenly that person is no longer a celebrity, they're a world leader.
well, I think Taylor Swift is rapidly going down that line, and I'll pose this hypothetical question: if Taylor Swift said, "I'm actually going to run for president," I think that is not a silly thing.
Yeah.
I think she would have a fighting chance. Now, Kanye, I think it was, said he was going to run for president. Everyone laughed because he's a fool, but she is not a fool, and that all of those things combined. So that's an interesting sort of litmus test. But here's a question I don't have an answer to, and again, we should talk about another time. Is I think you have described an extraordinarily powerful person, using the word power because it's a combination of popularity, followership, money, political influence, all these things. Can you construct that? I think all of these effects that we are describing are almost accidental side of effects of the thing that happened before. Do I think her parents said when she was 11, we are going to create this monster that has $1 billion, can influence elections? I don't think so at all. There's an interesting question, though, that how much can you construct this? And probably maybe we should look at influencers where that is exactly what they have done consciously from the beginning. I will do these 5 things because they will create these outcomes. But going back to your point, because I do think it's, particularly with a presidential election coming up this year, I think this is her political impact is fascinating. So this was an article on The Hill, and it talks about exactly this, the Super Bowl. So as you mentioned, she's gone out with lots of famous people over the years, but currently she is seeing Travis Kelce, who is a football player, American football player, and I think he's from the Kansas City Chiefs, and they were in the Super Bowl this year. And so people got very excited because Travis Kelce was in the Super Bowl, and Taylor Swift has been seen at all the games, cheering, exciting, drinking beer out of plastic cups because she's that girl next door. Vivek Ramaswamy, who was the former Republican presidential candidate, implied that the Super Bowl is rigged to, quote, give Swift more prominence for an eventual Biden endorsement. He went on to say, I wonder who's going to win the Super Bowl next month, Ramaswamy wrote, and I wonder if there's a major presidential endorsement coming from an artificially, culturally propped up couple. In other words, his statement is, this is a conspiracy. First of all, this couple is some liberal conspiracy that, look, they're powerful together because there's the power of Travis Kelce. And secondly, they are going to create an environment where they will conspiratorially make them win the Super Bowl, not because they're good at American football, because this is the deep state doing it. Okay, let's take a step back. It's insane. Oh my God, this is a presidential hopeful saying that there is a conspiracy by Taylor Swift to drive this activity. That's mental. It carries on. One American news host, Alison Steinberg, suggested that Taylor Swift is, quote, owned by George Soros, a longtime hate figure on the right because of his support for liberal causes.
It's always George Soros, always.
But again, this is insane. Fox News, can't leave out Fox, one of my favorites, Fox News. Janine Pirro, during an appearance on The Five, quote, urged Swift not to get involved in politics because of its capacity to alienate your fans. I'm so proud of Janine that she's looking out for Taylor here, and not because she's like, you have the power to change our politics, which clearly Fox News has a high agenda to shape. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
We're the ones who shape the agenda in the news and what you should believe, not you.
So there's a couple of points on that. One is, I don't think Vivek Ramaswamy actually believed this deep state conspiracy, but of course he knows a lot of people will. I think there are 2 elements. One is the disbelief that the traditional institutions of power are now losing grip so quickly. And the second one is, as a result of the shift in power from institutions to arguably individual celebrities and commercial interests, is creating, or is exacerbating certainly, this facile sort of polarization of not just politics but complex issues, where actually it's easier to show mistrust than it is to tackle the truth and the complexity of the issues at hand. But some of this isn't new. So whilst you said, if Taylor Swift ran for president, that would probably not be as ridiculous as it perhaps sounds. But of course, Ronald Reagan was a movie star.
Well, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump was arguably not a great businessman, but quite a famous one, made famous by being a celebrity, by being on The Apprentice, by creating you've got to give credit to Donald Trump for this, creating a brand around his name, around his personal narrative, in a way that other business people of similar standing haven't done. And that has created a power of celebrity. Arnold Schwarzenegger, a presidential candidate, if it wasn't for the fact that he's not a US citizen. If you said back in the 90s, we're going to have Donald Trump as president, and by the way, Arnold Schwarzenegger will already have been one of the most successful governors of California, people would have said, no, I take your point, but you're stretching it far too far. But the reality is we're in that world, and the idea of brand, the idea of personal narrative, the idea of influence, the term influencer, has become such a thing that I can't remember what the statistic is, but it's the majority, I think, of teenagers in the UK right now, when asked what they want to do when they grow up, want to be an influencer.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating?
And so I think that we've very quickly gone away from Taylor Swift to tackle some of the really challenging aspects of power dynamics, leadership, followership, and influence of the 21st century. On top of that, of course, there's the whole AI aspects of creating content that is, on the face of it, absolutely believable, that underlying veracity of it is very difficult to ascertain. And that creates a whole trust erosion problem in its own right. Fascinating. And I think the key aspect of why she is so powerful and why this is such an important episode.
Well, I want to, because I know we're coming towards the end, and I wanted to talk about this. I'm going to use the word cult, not because I think Taylor Swift is a cult, because it has very negative connotations, but as we discussed earlier, this idea that when you have a large group of people, how they behave, whether you're Taylor Swift, whether you're in the military or another organization, is really interesting. So there's a really interesting podcast called Sounds Like a Cult. And there's episodes on Jonestown, there's episodes on the things we might recognize normally as a cult. And they did one on Taylor Swift. And they talked about what I thought was some really interesting things there about why there are elements of Taylor Swift's followership that is cult-like. That they talk about the fact that girls sit around, knit, and talk about her, and that it's a granny-ish kind of thing, and that she creates a personal experience. And one of the things that makes her so successful is she is not a Michael Jackson who you could never imagine spending time with. She literally is the girl next door, and the stakes are lower than other cults, and the consequences are different, but the fanaticism is the same. And they talk about the fact it's motivated by people not wanting to feel alone. And it's very easy to say, well, that's just weak people not. No, this is every human being. When a great military leader says, tomorrow, gentlemen, we're going to cross the channel and run up the beach, people want to not feel alone. This is bad enough on my own, I want to be together. So it's an incredibly powerful thing. And they also talked about, which is very much an element of cult, it feels good to surrender to a group like this. There is a warm and lovely feeling when you are part of this group that has its identity. And people love having a simple thing or person to follow in a world of ultimate choice. There's also this fabulous element of elitism, that if you don't get Taylor Swift, somehow we're better than you. That's fascinating. And as I said earlier, people look at her lyrics like it's Bible study. and that can be dangerous. I just think there is an element of cult, but if you scratch out the word cult and you say there's some really interesting dynamics when there's a large enough group of people that you can't control how they see you or what they do based on what they understand. I was talking to my wife Ali about us doing this Taylor Swift one, and we talked about some of the conspiracy theories, and she said something which I thought was really interesting. She said, maybe to be an influencer, you have to have conspiracy theories today. This idea of it's no longer about Taylor Swift, it's about the image of Taylor Swift, and the
Yeah.
image you just can't control.
I think there's two aspects to that. One is, I think as you get bigger and bigger in your following and more famous, it is now much easier to get a counter message out there, especially if it's a controversial and sensational one. And so it's a much more dangerous time to be an influencer. Well, perhaps dangerous is the wrong word, but you will attract more false narratives, accusations, and stories because people are trying to effectively leverage your own influence, your own fame for their clickbait going viral or to get their money. And of course, that's really dangerous because if there is a legitimate story there, if there is, you know, the Me Too movement, the counter argument to the Me Too movement, and by the way, I think the Me Too movement was a very progressive, positive step in liberating a victim group to come forward, rectifying the problem of powerful people being able to get away with things. But of course, what it also did was it gave people a voice to say, well, they're only doing that because they want fame or money, and there were, you know, a small minority of cases of false accusations. So I think there is an element of, as you get famous, there is going to be these counter stories and stuff. And the more people are driven by media, social media posts going viral, the number of followers, the number of clicks, the number of likes, the more that controversy and sensationalism drives this, the more that will happen. But secondly, there's an element of, as you become more famous, more influential, as we talked about with Taylor Swift and the Swifties being, you know, a power group in their own right, and we've seen it with, you know, the K-pop example that I gave, you are then also influenced by your audience. And so you see celebrities go on this journey of, and some more than others, and I'm not going to mention any specific names here because I don't think we've got the time to go into it in enough detail, but you see people who were propelled into the spotlight because of a talent that they have or a legitimate situation that found them garnering a following, that then can maintain that, get ever more extreme in their viewpoints or ever more sensationalist in their comments, such that they are pandering to this narrative that sends them on a journey. And so they do become conspiratorial, they do become the proponents of conspiracies and wacky ideas because that's how they stay in the spotlight. For some people, it's a very deliberate persona and they don't actually believe it, but they do it to garner the clicks and the likes. And I think some people, they just go down that black hole.
Just to finish us off, I read a LinkedIn post which was called Marketing Like a Mastermind, 5 Taylor Swift inspired strategies you should adopt. This was Anna Madill, or Madill, CEO of the Avenue Marketing Agency. And I read through this. Again, that's interesting that people are now talking from their business as a perspective. Being more like Taylor Swift is a good thing. But as I read it, I retitled it in my mind, and I thought it'd be interesting because the whole point of this is not just, ooh, isn't Taylor Swift interesting and powerful? It is an attempt to try and capture what makes these people influencers and how can we apply those rules. So I've kind of rewritten her 5, I think I've done 4, and it's called, also known as, Taylor Swift's Guide to Leadership Without Authority, because that's what Taylor Swift is. No one's telling you to like Taylor Swift. No one's forcing you at gunpoint or paying you. People like Taylor Swift, despite the fact she has no, in inverted commas, authority. So here's what Anna said But here's, you could see, you could actually make this more about leadership. The first one is create a fan-centric experience. Create a team-centric experience. Fans interact with her, she interacts with them. So creating that relationship, as we have discussed with your team members, not just this, I am this person in this ivory tower and I don't speak to the underlings. Create that engagement with your teams. It's obvious, but I think Taylor Swift does it in a way that shows how to do it really, really well. The second one, which I liked, and I'm saying this with a wry smile on my face, that Anna said, promote intrigue and speculation. So there's a big thing around Easter eggs and about fans having to find different combinations of search words to uncover the title of a song. And there was a, when they did that, this was, I think, 1989 album. I probably got that wrong. But when she did that, Google's servers crashed because their fans were seeing too much. Anyway, the point being, promote intrigue and speculation. I'm not implying as a leader or a CEO or a commander in the military, you should promote intrigue and speculation in terms of badness. This is about building narrative tension, build interest in what you're doing, make it so that people care, are trying to figure it out, are engaged in that process. So that was
Well,
good.
you know, no successful politician ever got there because they're boring.
Very well said. The next one, invite your critics to your brand identity. I love this was written from a marketing perspective, but it could almost be Sun Tzu that was writing this, or Klaus Fitz. What does she mean by that? The song Mean, apparently, which I'd not listened to, was inspired by a review she received after a 2010 Grammy Awards performance with Stevie Nicks. And rumors surfaced that Taylor and Katy Perry were feuding. And so Taylor invited Katy to make a cameo in her music video called You Need to Calm Down. What she did is she uses critiques and confrontations as fuel for her and inside jokes. Take people who are, this guy is crazy, this is a stupid strategy, we shouldn't be doing this, bring them in so they go, actually, this is a brilliant strategy. You've just taken critics and turned them into powerful supporters. And the last one, and actually this is probably a good place to finish it, is tell your most authentic story. Now, the reason why she said this, Taylor's music is personal. She's sparing her experiences that are vulnerable but universal. We feel like we learn something about Taylor every time a new song comes out, but we learn about ourselves. That's all fine. But I think this is, for me, and maybe this is a personal reflection, authentic leadership, the leadership that is based on genuinely who you are and what you believe. You're never going to go, oh, bugger, I told them that I don't really care, or actually that's a lie because I want to make money. I think one of the things that makes Taylor Swift most powerful is because people say, I believe you are like me and I want to be a part of that group. And I think that as any leader at any level, in any position, if people believe you are telling the truth, if people believe that is really you, that is the single most powerful thing that will sustain you, not just for a week or a month, but for the entire time. It will sustain you when things are going well. It will sustain you when things are going badly, because I know this is the person I trust, they're being honest with me. And it sustains you when unexpected bad things happen. Tell your most authentic story. I think that is at the heart of what makes Taylor successful, but I think that's one of the biggest things we can take away for ourselves.
I think that's really well said. There's a guy called David Kilcullen who's quite famous as an expert on counterinsurgency, and he made a point that Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the second in command of Al Qaeda, and then when Osama bin Laden was killed, became the leader, and then he was killed by the Americans in Kabul a couple of years ago. But Ayman al-Zawahiri once said in an interview to a Canadian reporter, in the West, you get things the wrong way around. You design your military operations, and then once you've designed your operations, you craft your narrative around them. In Al Qaeda, we do it differently. We do it the opposite way around. We design our message, we work out what we want to tell the world, and then we design our operations around it. And I think there's something about authenticity that means, in a world of deep fakes, in a world of people looking for opportunities to attack you, opportunities to create sensationalist headlines, the more authentic you are, the more that you project a persona that is true to who you are and the values you have, even if it's slightly exaggerated, even if you use bits of clothing or mannerisms or statements that become the artifacts that define your persona. If they're based around a foundation of what you truly believe, it's really hard to highlight where you're fake, to highlight where you're lying, to highlight where, if you are dishonest, you are lying, if you are projecting one image outright and then living a different life separately, then that will, in the 24-hour news cycle, the 360-degree social media bubble that surrounds people, that will get picked up on, that hypocrisy will get highlighted. I think authenticity has always been a foundational tenet of good leadership. But I think in today's modern connected world, it is more important than ever before. And you could have probably got away with more in the past than you can now. And I think that's genuinely a positive and a good thing about where we currently are, whilst there's also many slightly worrying things.
So there you go. That's Taylor Swift as an influencer. I mean, this is maybe the tenet of the whole of the podcast. It's so easy to look at things on the surface and dismiss them, but if you look deeper, there's some really, really interesting stuff. Taylor Swift is 33 years old and worth $1.1 billion. By any definition, she is a significant influencer in terms of her power, her skills, her economic impact, her personal success, and her political impact. I hope you found that one interesting, Gareth.
Genuinely fascinating. I was, a bit like with the Dolly Parton one, interested to learn something about something I didn't know a lot about, interested to explore leadership and management and culture from a different perspective, and have been absolutely blown away with how important looking at these things through different lenses from different perspectives is, and how important somebody like Taylor Swift, that your 16-year-old son can quite easily dismiss as just a pop star, dismiss it out of hand, and she's not a real leader, actually is arguably one of the most influential people in modern times, and a representation of how influence, leadership, and power are changing and changing rapidly, and how all of us that are interested in these things need to recognize that. So thank you for doing the research on this one and introducing the subject. I'm going to go for a very long run now, and I'm going to reflect on this and think about it a lot.
You say that, I'm going to go and bake some cookies for my team members, because apparently that's also the secret as well. Well, look, thank you for listening to this episode. If you're interested, please let us know on platform X. We are Battling with Biz. We would love to get emails from you, either telling us, this is dangerous after we talked about Swifties, what did we get wrong? What did we get right? And who else should we talk about? We are on battlingwithbusiness@gmail.com. Also, please subscribe. If this is the first time you've heard us, there's 62, 65, I never know what number we are, episodes before, where we talk about many of the topics we touched on. The cookies are calling. We'll speak to you all in the next episode of Battling with Business.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Cheerio.